can hear you.
Fantastic. Good evening, all. Thank you for the opportunity. And I also know the presentation that has gone before by Dr. Glasgow, which I believe very succinctly captured um, elements that are pertinent to Guyana's economic development. I want to say from the very outset that in premising the discourse on Guyana, we have to take into account the group trajectory that we are currently on and the dimensions that are essentially changing the dynamics which are occurring. I think over the past decade, Guyana's economy has been a hallmark of macroeconomic stability. We have also seen that institutions have begun to form into their own. We also begin to see some organizational efficiency happening, particularly in the public sector, which in the years that have gone by, we have certainly struggled with. From the very outset, it's important to note that Guyana's economy has actually transitioned from a low-income economy to an upper-middle-income economy, and this obviously will have tremendous impact on the government's availability of financing, particularly that of development financing. So from even observing the macroeconomic framework and what has been happening within the macroeconomic context, one can see that an opportunity arises immediately for investors. So within the past 3 years, the government of Guyana has taken to its parliament and has actually adopted a policy position on public-private partnerships. Now, from my vantage point in the Chamber of Commerce, I've seen a number of persons who are coming here, particularly looking at investment opportunities, but not entering into the actual business, but rather bringing investment. So capital and through venture capital, investment capital, etc., which I believe is an entirely new area for Guyana and presents itself as a very good opportunity for those countries that have been able to accumulate capital in the recent past. If you also look at the environment for doing business, I want to say that our economic growth has remained relatively stable over the past 10 years. We've averaged roughly around 4%, and inflation remains low, which of course provides a very suitable macroeconomic condition for investment overall. So just from the very outset, looking at Guyana, I mean, I've spoken quite at length to some persons in Barbados and in the Barbados private sector community, and they're rather impressed by the way that Guyana as a country has been able to handle the entire economy. So as regards a stable and conducive climate, I'd say that barring everything that has happened within the most recent past, we have had a history of demonstrating this. Of course, the oil and gas sector is one which is new here in Guyana, and that in itself will operate as a driving force in the economy. So looking at services which are not just core to the oil and gas sector, but also those areas that develop peripheral to the sector, those are also very important. And I've noted very keenly that over the past few years, we've had a tremendous increase in demand for some sector-specific activities. So for example, if we're talking subsectors, looking at transport and logistics, the demand for those services have increased massively. Construction is something which is booming here in Guyana, and the services have certainly increased. I would have mentioned public-private partnership investments. Those, I believe that there is tremendous scope for that here in Guyana, and within the context of the development financing framework, it certainly lends itself to that. Catering also and chandeliering services have also grown in demand recently. And I heard Dr. Glasgow also mention business support services. I want to say that there has been a tremendous increase in that in the recent past, as enterprises within and even without the oil and gas sector. So both core and peripheral to the sector, they're all looking to increase their operational efficiency and their internal efficiency and the way that they are organizing their activities. So it involves quite a bit uh, of dynamic change to the processes that are occurring in businesses. And um, the scope for consultancy and market research and other business support services has grown tremendously. I know, Roger, you have been here in Guyana quite a bit, and you can see the level of activity that has been occurring, particularly in the private sector community, as we prepared or as we were preparing for first oil. It's important to note that Guyana will be at roughly around 750,000 barrels by 2026. And 2025, 2026, those have been some revised projections. And that by no means provides a diminutive amount of economic or commercial opportunities here. Um, the notion of agro processing is one which I believe, when examining within the context of CARICOM, becomes very important, because here is where we actually can benefit from mutual arrangements, mutually beneficial arrangements. So I think I like to term it as the oil and gas sector having both push and pull effects here in the macro, or here in the Guyanese economy. Because essentially what you have found happening here in the private sector in Guyana is companies are beginning to move towards standardization, efficient management processes, etc., within their, their, their own space of operation. And that in itself will begin to drive some degree of competitiveness regionally. And this notion of Guyana becoming a breadbasket, I believe, is one which is very potent. And I do think that looking at CARICOM is where we actually have to. The Prime Minister Motley, who currently is the chair of CARICOM, has stressed on this point about our food import bill in the Caribbean region. And Guyana can leverage those opportunities. What it does, what the Caribbean region does, is that it provides tremendous economies of scale, which cannot be achieved as a result of the internal demand or the absence of a sufficient internal demand here in Guyana. So looking at that, I do believe that if we were to lower some of the non-tariff barriers in particular that exist within the region, um, and we have a government in Guyana that is pro-private sector development and um, really gears its policies and the conditions that exist here in Guyana toward private sector development targeted at some specific sectors, including that of agro processing. I believe that Guyana can actually become one of those hubs within the region that supplies many of our Caribbean sister nations um, with agricultural products. This, of course, comes with its own practical issue. Dr. Glasgow is well aware of many of them, sitting in the role of Director of Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a number of non-tariff barriers which exist. So I believe that as a region, if we are going to speak about this, it has to be a concerted, coordinated, and synchronous approach that we have to take. Because if we as Guyanese, and as the Guyanese economy begin to open up, allow more opportunities here, I believe our Investment Act, even though as outdated as it is in 2004, still provides a fair degree of of protection for foreign investors. It is quite liberal, and we do have quite a bit of a liberal open market here. Um, but that has to be matched with some degree of reciprocity from sister nations within the CARICOM region, particularly as we look at the non-tariff barriers. Moving forward, however, I just want to end those remarks, those preparatory in nature, by saying we have to focus on a couple things here in Guyana to ensure that the conducive environment for doing business exists. We're currently ranked 134th on the ease of doing business index. And when you look at many of those, when you disaggregate the index and you look at the specific causal factors for that low ranking, it has to do quite a bit with interagency coordination and weak institutional arrangements within Guyana. Now, obviously, those aren't easy to fix, but I think moving in that direction, firstly, by recognizing what they are, and then beginning to coordinate much better um, to allow or to foster for business development is absolutely necessary. But all of this, of course, starts from a vision, and I do believe that Guyana has to identify where it wants to position itself within CARICOM. Dr. Glasgow has sold very nicely the notion of agro-processing, and I do believe that it is one that we can pursue. Um, and most importantly, and I'll end on this, most importantly, we have to have public policy emanating from the government sector, which is pro-private sector, and the environment has to absolutely be there to be able to foster business growth, not just the larger enterprises here in Guyana, but particularly the SMEs, which will seek new markets in the CARICOM region. And I believe that the reciprocity is there in terms of allowing investors from within the region. So I just offer those, and I do look forward to the learned panelists and their perspective as we further in the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Rambarran. And I just want, I'm glad that you wrapped up on the point of having a facilitative environment, especially because in terms of the projections, the majority of